Hey guys, it's Caden. I just wanted to make this little video snippet before the actual video started just to thank y'all for watching the video, and if y'all do like it, subscribe and like. That means a lot to me as this is my first YouTube video. So, I did put a lot of time and effort into this iceberg with a lot of research with all of these topics I will dive into later, but I did also have fun doing this, and I hope y'all have just as much fun listening to me discuss them. So yeah, I will see y'all later. The original iceberg was made by Thaumiel, and I will put a link in the description to the original, so shout out to Thaumiel for making this. If you don't know what an iceberg is, basically it's a chart of a topic divided into tiers. The top tiers are filled with more well-known details or other topics, while as you get lower into the iceberg, you dive into more dark and more unknown things that are shunned by big media. So that's what I'm here for. So this is the iceberg of psychological and social experiments. So enjoy. The bystander effect was popularized by John Darley and BYSTANDER in 1968. They became interested in the bystander effect after the murder of Kitty Geneviese's, where 38 witnesses saw her get raped and stabbed, but no one called the authorities. Their hypothesis was that the more people that witness a crime, the less likely one individual is to take action. They conducted an experiment where they isolated either one person, two people, or three people. While the participants were doing some random tasks, they would start to slowly fill the room up with smoke to see how fast it would take for one person to take action. The person that was isolated alone noticed the smoke in about 5 seconds versus the people that were in a group that noticed the smoke after about 20 seconds, showing that their hypothesis was true. The HIGHSCOPE experiment was founded by David Weikart in 1970. The intent of the experiment was to increase the IQ of African American school children. Basically, the experiment included two groups, an intervention group and a control group. The intervention group went through a process of 2 years where every day during the school year, they would have 2 hours of planning, executing, and reviewing certain tasks. The teachers of the intervention group also came to the household of the students to have a 1.5 hour discussion weekly on how the kids were doing. After a certain amount of time, they compared the intervention group to the control group and found that the intervention group had a higher chance of graduation, a higher chance of employment, more likely to pursue higher education, more healthier, and less likely to be detained by authorities. The halo effect was founded by Edward L. Thorndike in 1920. His hypothesis was that one good characteristic of somebody can influence your perspective on their whole personality. The experiment's pretty straightforward, as they asked officers to rate their subordinates on their intelligence, their physique, their attractiveness, their leadership, and their character. While analyzing the results, Edward found that the people who were taller or rated more attractive were also rated as having better character and better leadership skills, and also a better soldier. The halo effect is present in regular social settings, as people with higher attractiveness are also rated with higher morality, higher mental health, and higher IQ. The Hawthorne effect was coined by Henry Landsberger in 1958. He coined this term after analyzing Hawthorne's studies between 1924 and 1932 in Chicago. The studies found that change in lighting throughout the factory showed an increase in productivity throughout the workers. Henry Landsberger found this to be false. He stated that the increase in productivity was due to the workers knowing that they were being observed. This is also known as the experimenter effect. Later studies found that productivity also increased when companies changed in location, changed in hours, or changed in even a cleaning routine. ASCH conformity is based on studies done by Solomon and Asch in 1951. Solomon wanted to see if majority group decision would overrule or influence one's internal personal beliefs and opinions. He conducted this by doing the famous line study. He first isolated one participant and simply asked him one question: which of these lines was equal to the first line? While alone, individuals almost got every single question correct. He then would place individuals within a group of actors to ask the same exact question. If you don't know what an actor is in a research study, basically it's a form of deception where participants in the study are actually actors working for the researcher and are given certain instructions on what to do. This is obviously unknown to the one participant that is actually being studied. Solomon's instructions to the actors were to agree on the wrong answer every other question. After hearing the majority group decision on which line is equal to the first line, the actual participant was then caught in a dilemma. They had to decide if they were going to conform to the majority group decision of the incorrect answer or be an outlier and choose the correct choice. 37% of the time, the participants conformed to majority group decision on the incorrect answer. This then proved that their hypothesis was correct. So the next entry on this list just says VSAUCE, like minefield experiments, which I do love and recommend to everybody, but he doesn't really say one specific one, so I'm just going to talk about my personal favorite, the first episode, which is about isolation. Just to clarify, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. I've done so much research on isolation and solitary confinement, so if I do talk about this one a little bit longer, it's good reason. So basically, VSAUCE, or I'm just going to call him Michael, he is like a sciencey YouTuber. He does science YouTube videos, but he isolated himself for a complete 72 hours. Before he isolated himself, he ran some tests on his vitals to see what would change after he was isolated for 72 hours. This includes measuring his blood pressure, his basic reflexes, his cognitive ability, his sleep cycle, etc., etc. Again, this room does not have any windows, any clocks, or anything. It is just a straight white room with Soylent, a bed, and a toilet, and that's basically it. After he said goodbye to his family, he went into the room and immediately went to sleep. This is where things went wrong. Woke up at about 4:52 in the morning and claimed that he woke up about 2 or 3 times within the night and said that it felt to be around 8 a.m. After drinking some Soylent for breakfast, he began to do some strange things. He began doing push-ups and squats, which his wife said that she's never seen him do a push-up or a squat in his life. He then tried to stimulate his brain a little bit by reciting the alphabet backwards and walking around in circles, counting his steps all the way to 1,000. At around noon that same day, he claimed that it felt to be around 7:30, 8 o'clock-ish, and decided to have dinner and begin to get in bed. At around 4 o'clock that same day, he believed that it had been a full 24 hours and he only had 2 more days to go. After counting some more steps, doing bench press with a pillow, and throwing around a bottle, he claims that he doesn't like hearing his own voice going into his ears anymore and is quite bored. His sense of time has been destroyed quite well already, as at around 2 o'clock in the morning on Friday, he claimed it to be around 8 o'clock p.m. He decided to get some shut-eye and then woke up at around 8:30 in the morning on Friday and claimed it to be Saturday morning at around 9 a.m. At around 2:30 p.m. on Friday, Michael claims it to be Saturday at around 9, which is the day he gets out, and is anticipating the door to open within 1 to 2 hours. He then waits silently for the door to be open for it to not open, and it seems quite depressing at this moment where he knows he's not getting out, but he has no idea what time it is. At this point in time, you can see him start to be visibly frustrated and complaining about some things throughout the room and complaining about the experiment as a whole and his dissatisfaction with it. At around 9 p.m. on Friday, he explains his frustrations more, claiming that it's quite hard for him to even remember what he thought a second ago. He then seems to be frustrated or looking for something as he's counting his bottles of Soylent that he's drank already, and seems to have misplaced or lost one, although he just simply miscounted the amount of bottles he's already drank. At around 8:30 a.m. on Saturday, he claims that all of his dreams throughout this experiment have been in the room and about this room. He starts talking about his discomfort with the soap smell and it being right across the room from him, and how it just really aggravates him about his location and where his place is right now. After sleeping through another night, he wakes up at around 5:30 p.m. on Saturday and is really displaced and aggravated. Begins pacing around the room and begins to stare at the doorknob and begins to open the door. He stops himself and closes the door and looks even more confused as he states, "I must have just dreamt it," and begins to sit down and look even more disappointed and depressed. At around 10:35 p.m. on Saturday, Michael is startled by a knock at the door and is told that it has been 72 hours and he can come out. After he was out, they ran the same exact test that they did beforehand and found that his blood pressure and his pulse was extremely high, but the doctor said it was due to his excitement and his adrenaline after coming out of the room. They also ran the same test through his cognitive skills and his reflexes and found both of them to be better, and the doctor was actually quite surprised, as his hypothesis was that they would be substantially worse. Okay, I'm done with my little VSAUCE rant, but I highly advise y'all to watch the isolation video. It's really good, and yeah. The Robbers' Cave experiment was done in the 1940s, where 20 to 11-year-old boys were taken to summer camp and split into 2 groups. All of these little boys had no idea that they were even in an experiment and basically thought it to be a summer camp. The kids were split into 2 groups of 11, and each group didn't know that the other group even existed or was even in the summer camp. They asked both of the groups to come up with a name to call themselves, and one group said that they would be called the Eagles, while the other would be called the Rattlers. The researchers let the individual groups form some type of chemistry between themselves before introducing them to the other group. The researchers then plotted them against each other by doing competitive games, and the winner would get a trophy. They began to call the other children in the other group by slurs and chanting inappropriate songs to throw them off. The Rattlers won the overall trophy for the competitive games, and the Eagles weren't too happy about it. The dissatisfaction between the groups eventually led to the Eagles refusing to even eat in the same room as the Rattlers. The researchers then went into their final phase of the experiment, which was to fix the conflict. To try to fix the conflict, the researchers made the 2 groups work on teamwork problem-solving skills together. This worked, and eventually they went home together on the same bus, and everything was nice. The researchers made an analogy that each of the groups were kind of a culture in some type of way, and this is how conflict between countries arise. This experiment is important in the field of psychology, as it shows clear ways on how to fix conflicts between cultures. The Bobo doll experiment was performed by Albert Bandura in 1961. The purpose of the experiment was to test the aggression of kids who were exposed to aggressive behavior by adults. In one instance, the child would be exposed to aggressive behavior by an adult kicking, throwing, and punching the Bobo doll, also verbally saying sock it, whip it, punch it, stuff like that. In the other instance, the child would be given directions by the adult, which didn't even seem to notice the Bobo doll. Children were then left in a room with toys, as well as the Bobo doll, and was told for 20 minutes to play. The results showed that the kids who were exposed to the aggressive behavior by the adult were more likely to pursue aggressive physical behavior and verbal behavior. When divided by gender, the little boys had around 270 aggressive instances, whereas females only had around 128 instances. This study shows how important mimicking and copying is to a children's learning abilities when it comes to adults' behavior. The Stanford prison experiment was performed by Philip Zimbardo in 1971. The independent variable of this experiment is kind of muddy, and we'll talk about that later, but basically, he wanted to see the reactions and behaviors of the prisoners in his prison experiment. He released an ad and took volunteers and randomly placed them in groups to either be a prisoner or a guard. This experiment is known as one of the most unethical experiments, and I'm going to go through each of the 6 days that it lasted step by step, just so y'all really get what it was about. The first day of this experiment included the volunteers that were chosen to be prisoners randomly to be arrested at their home unknowingly. Zimbardo wanted to do this unknowingly because they wanted it to feel real and very authentic to the law system. Once they were at the jail, they were put into the books and was stripped down naked and served. They were then given a prison uniform, which was just a plain uniform with only a number barcode on their chest. The volunteers that were randomly chosen to be the guards in this experiment were already in the experiment and were already dressed and given instructions on what to do, which was to not let the prisoners escape. Things started going downhill almost immediately, as on day 2, the wake-up call from the guards was ignored by the prisoners, where they were punished immensely. Their clothes were taken, so they were stripped down naked again. Their mattresses were taken out of their cells, and then they were fired with fire extinguishers as a punishment. After this refusal, the guards had an idea where they would reward good prisoners by giving them their clothes back, giving them a mattress, and letting them use the bathroom, also giving them food that wasn't available to the other prisoners. The prisoners that were still deemed to be not good were being punished still by making them do push-ups and refusal of having a toilet where they just had to go to the restroom in their room on a bucket. After seeing the guards reward good prisoners, on day 4, the prisoners start to have tension between themselves as they found the good prisoners to be kind of a teacher's pet and started to dislike them. The prisoners that were rewarded for the good behavior kind of resented the other prisoners as well, because they felt that if they just followed the rules, they would have their clothes back, their mattress back, and they're kind of just doing it to themselves. Day 5 is where things begin to crumble. Day 5 included visitations from the prisoners' spouses and families. During these visitations, many families saw that their child was not doing good and was suffering from malnutrition and bruises, and immediately notified a lawyer trying to get them out of there. One of Zimbardo's colleagues actually asked what the independent variable was in this study, and Zimbardo really couldn't come up with an answer. This is when Zimbardo's colleagues advised him to stop the experiment. On day 6, Zimbardo paid the prisoners and the guards and did a debriefing and released them. Recently, a lot of psychologists and businesses and schools have said that Zimbardo is very wrong for his unethical ways and methods of doing this experiment, which I totally agree. Imagine if you volunteered for a random psychology study and didn't even know that you got it, but 2 weeks later you were bombarded with officers and stripped and taken to jail with no reason why. At the end of the experiment, Zimbardo said that the behavior and reaction of the guards and prisoners was due to the actual simulated prisoner effect, not the actual personality traits of the guards and prisoners. The MILGRIM study began in July of 1961 by Stanley Milgram. Now, this was right after the Holocaust, so a lot of the officers under Adolf Hitler were being prosecuted for the deaths of millions of Jews. But the question behind this actual study was, are these officers really to blame, or were they just following orders? This experiment began as I released an ad in a newspaper for volunteers around the age of 20 and 50, and there was no real requirement for education, so really anybody. On the arrival to the actual experiment, the participant would be introduced to another participant and be told that they would be learning the effects of punishment on learning capabilities. Each of the participants were given a slip of paper at random, and one would say learner and the other would say teacher. Now, this slip of paper thing wasn't actually random at all, as the other participant is actually an actor and will play the learner every single time, as both slips of paper say teacher, but the actor will always say, I'm the learner. Also, the researcher made it very clear that the actor portraying as a learner had a heart condition. The teacher and learner would then be separated into 2 separate rooms. Now remember, the teacher is the actual participant we're studying, while the learner is just an actor that's in on it. These rooms are connected by audio, so you can hear each other, but you cannot see each other. In the room with the teacher, the researcher would then give them a 45-volt shock to actually show them what they would be doing to the learner every single wrong answer. The researcher then gave the teacher a list of word pairs such as like nice day, blue ball, and green box. The teacher would then read these word pairs to the learner, and the learner would have to recite them back by memory. The researcher informed the teacher that for every wrong answer, the shock voltage will go up 15. Now remember, the learner is an actor, they're a Confederate, they are in on it, so no one's actually being shocked, and it's really just a pre-recorded thing of him screaming and banging on the walls and stuff, which we'll get into later, but just to clarify, no one's actually getting shocked. As the learner continued to get the questions wrong, you would start to hear him screaming that his heart is hurting, he's banging on the walls, and then it is followed by just complete silence. At this point, most of the teachers felt uncomfortable and asked to stop, but here's the thing. After the first refusal to shock, the researcher would follow up with 4 statements. The first one would say, please continue. The second time they refused, he would say, please go on, we need you. And the third time they would refuse to shock, he would say, it's essential you continue, with the fourth and final refusal saying, you have no choice, you must continue. If they still refused after the 4th statement, then the test was over, or the test was over if they delivered the final shock 3 times in order of 450 volts. The results of the test showed that 27 out of 40 participants, or 65% of them, delivered the final shock of 450 volts, although they did feel uncomfortable about it. Also to mention, no one got to the 4th statement of refusal under 300 volts. Many universities say that this experiment was unethical because it caused extreme emotional stress, although some do argue that it was due to their free action of shocking the learner. In Milgrim's defense, 84% of the participants did write back and say that they were glad or very glad to participate in the experiment. Although a big no-no that MILGRIM did is he didn't actually fully debrief the participants, so some of them didn't even know that it was fake and they actually thought that they were shocking someone and it was about punishment on learning ability. MILGRIM also did a lot of variations with this study, and it kind of goes back to the line test that I talked about earlier in this video about conformity and conforming to the majority group decision. Basically, instead of being alone with the researcher, you would have a partner that would also agree that they felt uncomfortable, and this made the participants more likely to refuse and get to the refusal of the fourth statement. This study also shows how important majority group decision is and how it can influence your personal beliefs and opinions, as in this variation with the partner, only about 10% of people continued to deliver the 450 shock. So that is the end of Tier 1. I will be working on Tier 2 pretty shortly, but I just wanted to say thank y'all for getting all the way through this video to see this. And if y'all do like it, please subscribe and like and comment down below on what you thought or what I should talk about next. But yeah, other than that, I'll see y'all next video.